Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Title I Committee of Practitioners meeting this morning. I'm Tara Rodriguez. I'm the Director of the Division of School and Program Improvement at KDE. I'm so glad you're able to join us this morning. And we will go ahead and get started with our roll call. And we have a new member today, so I'll just spend a little extra time when we get to our new member. Let's start with Kelly Abney. And if you can, just please make sure, since this is a public meeting, make sure that your camera is on and that you are unmuted. And just respond if you are here when I call your name. Kelly Abney. Jan Anger. Jan, I thought I saw Jan join us. Is Jan here? Okay. Mary Beth Bowling. Christina Dalton. Ricky Hanger.
Here.
Stephanie Harris.
Here.
Diane Hatfield.
Present.
Holly Kimball. David Malonti. Stacy Talley. Robert Cheryl Tanner.
Here.
And Daryl Vincent.
I am here.
All right, great. And David is hung up in traffic. There's apparently a wreck out on the road, so he will probably be joining us, and there may be another person or two who joins a little late. But I want to welcome Mr. Vincent. He is our newest member, and he is from an area technology center principal from Bullitt County. And Mr. Vincent, did I leave anything out or say anything incorrectly?
No, that is all correct.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, and to Mr. Vincent and for everybody for being on the meeting this morning. So we'll do a quick review of the agenda. We have first a presentation on curriculum development and high quality instructional resources with Crystal Rowland. And then we have some information about Portrait of a Learner. That's from David Cook. That is another KDE agency initiative. I'm going to talk a bit about paraeducators under Title I, Part A. And then we'll talk about future agenda topics and our upcoming meeting in April. And then we will adjourn. So we'll get started on our first item. This item came about because we had at the last meeting, I believe, of the committee, we had a presentation on evidence-based practices, and we had a question from a committee member about which curriculum is best for Title I schools. And so I knew we had a lot of work in that area at KDE, and that is a question that would be relevant to our Title I Part A. Again, this Committee of Practitioners is not just Title I Part A, but it's Part C, which is the migrant program, and Part D, which is neglected and delinquent as well. So Crystal Rowland is the director of the Division of Program Standards, and she will be able to provide us with hopefully a nice, I know she will provide us with some good information about this work, and that hopefully that will help answer the question we had about curriculum. So Crystal, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tara. Are you able to see my presentation okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, good morning, and thank you for having me. As Tara said, my name is Crystal Rowland, and I serve as the Director of Program Standards in the Office of Teaching and Learning. And there has been much attention lately on instructional resources, and it leaves many to wonder, is there a best choice? And so I'm glad that this question came about and that I can answer some questions for you and just build some background. The answer is, when it comes to instructional resources, they're not all created equal. And so we've made the distinction of those that are considered high quality instructional resources, or HQIR. And we'll define those in a moment, but even among HQIR, there's not one size fits all, and they do require additional considerations to truly impact student outcomes. So the Office of Teaching and Learning advocates for a locally designed curriculum that is anchored in high quality instructional resources to meet the needs of all learners. And so today I'll be sharing some considerations and guidance for developing a high quality local curriculum that will address the needs of each student. This curriculum will be tailored to the local priorities of the district, aligned to the Kentucky academic standards, and supported by research-based high quality instructional resources. So why do we advocate for HQIR for all schools, including Title I schools? I want to share some findings from research to offer a rationale for using HQIR. And after these slides, I'd like to hear your thoughts around what resonates most with you in your role around why resources matter, especially considering the needs of Title I schools. And what data or information did you find most surprising? So feel free to make some mental notes or jot them down if you have pen and paper handy. For each slide, I'll read its headline, the sentence at the top, and give the source before allowing a moment of sort of silent sense making. And after that, I'll add a little commentary before we transition. So this first piece of data, this is research. This is teachers and instructional resources are central to student learning. And this is from the Brookings Institute. Why are instructional resources so critical to addressing gaps in learning? This slide shows how many factors influence what happens in the classroom. And instructional resources exert influence both directly on student learning and indirectly on teachers' choices as they prepare and facilitate learning. Resources are a top priority for teachers, and this is from Scholastic. A Scholastic report from 2016 found these to be the top funding priorities identified by teachers. We can see the gaps in the current materials are not just noticed by researchers and district leads. Teachers, those using the instructional resources every day with their students, are clear their resources are not yet aligned, and they would prioritize funding for HQIRs given the choice. Teachers spent significant time creating or selecting their own assignments, but not often with good results. And this is from the New Teacher Project, TNTP. Research tells us teachers spend around 7 hours per week, 250 hours per year creating or curating resources. When looking for resources, they tend to go to Google, Teachers Pay Teachers, and Pinterest, just to name a few. And this results in the use of unvetted resources piecemealed together that are often low in quality and lead to inequities in the student learning experience due to a lack of coherence. The graphs on this slide illustrate how the resources found and made tend to fall short. In the first graph, look at grade level alignment. We see teacher-created or selected resources are aligned to grade level standards only 20% of the time. What about subject-specific practices? Only 13% of teacher-created selected assignments allow students access to disciplinary practices. And in terms of authentic connection, only 16% of teacher-created selected assignments help students make rich, deeper learning connections to big ideas and to the world around them. Supplemental online resources tend to be low depth of knowledge. This is from the Fordham Institute. When reviewers evaluated supplemental materials found online for depth of knowledge, or DOK, which as we know is the cognitive demand required for students to successfully engage with the content, most of the content included in the main activity of each was DOK level 1 or 2, recall and reproduction, basic skills, and knowledge. Nearly half of the main activities had no DOK level 3 content, strategic or critical thinking, And 94% had no DOK level 4 content, extended and applied thinking. Student success on assignments versus mastery of grade level standards on those assignments. This is from TNTP. So overall outcomes demonstrate that even when students are successful on classroom assignments, if those assignments are not properly aligned to grade level standards, students don't have the readiness we might have assumed they do and are not prepared for the rigors of future college level coursework. This research also shows students of color and from low income backgrounds are most impacted and least likely to have access to grade level instruction. Students have inconsistent access to content that is grade level appropriate. And this is from TNTP. What is the impact of this on the student experience? Inconsistent access to grade level work. Students are spending 581 of 720 hours, equivalent to 81% of a school year, on assignments that are not grade level appropriate. And this is particularly significant for students of color and students who are economically disadvantaged. So this is clearly an issue of equity. Access to quality content also matters to students beyond high school. This is also from TNTP. And there are implications beyond high school. 40% of college students take at least one remedial course. These courses cover content that should have been mastered in high school, and this comes at a cost to students and their families to the tune of about $1.5 billion annually. It also impacts our students going into the workforce out of high school, with business and industry partners telling us students are missing skills needed for employability. We've just looked at what happens when teachers and students do not have access to HQIR. However, when teachers do have access to and effectively implement HQIRs, research shows it results in improvements in teacher practice and gains in student achievement. For example, a 2017 study showed that the effect of using an HQIR is the same as moving an average performing teacher to one at the 80th percentile. And a 2018 study showed teachers using high quality math instructional resources engage students in the mathematical practices at a significantly higher rate than teachers without access to an HQIR, which connects to supporting deeper learning through students engaging in the practices of the content area. We can imagine something similar holding true for other content areas as well, like science, for instance, due to the intentional research-based design of HQIRs and their emphasis on students engaging in disciplinary practices. So that was a lot of information coming at you just now, and the implications of it are a lot to process. So I'd love to provide some space for us to process that together. So after taking a moment to review and think, please either post in the chat or unmute and share aloud what resonated most with you and what might have been most surprising.
I'll just unmute and talk. The one thing I like that you shared was the supplemental resource online part of depth of knowledge. That is something that in our schools, that trying to get our teachers not just putting an online piece of supplemental resource into a station, but how much are we providing that direct instruction in our tier 3, tier 2, even tier 1 processes. How important it is for our teachers to be directly instructing versus just picking something on a computer type program. So I like that you shared that. I've been fighting the TPT as a principal, as a district administrator now. So I appreciate you all advocating and educating our state with that, as not necessarily the best resources out there. And I really like that Katie is focusing on the highly qualified instructional resources. I just wish years ago, we used to fund textbooks per se. So I feel like we're doing a better job as a state to push this information out. But the monies that have been backing this has all been ESSER over the last couple of years. And so moving forward for schools, that is something I feel is a concern, is that we're being educated on these things. I know there's a lot of mini grants out there, but that's also just an additional process of things, and you're not guaranteed that. So those were just some thoughts as you were sharing.
Thank you for sharing that. We know that funding is a significant concern for local schools and districts, and something that, you know, we advocate for as much as we can from where we are. And knowing that there are many open education resources which are free to access, but that doesn't necessarily mean free to implement, because there is professional learning that's required in addition to other supplies and resources that may be needed to implement those fully.
Yes, years ago, I do feel like it was an emphasis when they funded textbooks per se, being in the state of Kentucky, but over the last several years, outside of ESSER funds, I feel like that has not been a focus or push. And that's not necessarily your all's fault, but it's just a reality of what's happened in Kentucky schools.
Just to add on to what she was saying as well, I'm a chief academic officer for a school district. And so one of my main responsibilities is working with our new teachers. So just the importance of the HQIR in my district, we are getting most of our teachers now are alternatively certified. So they haven't gone through that traditional education pathway. And so being able to hand them something that is aligned and is a high quality resource for them to use in the classroom, instead of them having to worry about finding that, plus focusing on learning how to teach at the same time. So just the importance of the HQIR really resonated with me.
I appreciate you sharing that. So we've had several pilots, curriculum development pilots in reading and writing, mathematics, and one currently for science. And we've had the opportunity to visit schools and talk with teachers and leaders within the building about their experiences with HQIR. And one in particular stands out, meeting with a third grade team, of them saying, you know, if as a new teacher coming in, this would have been very helpful to me to have sort of the scripting that was in their particular one that they had selected. But she said, even as a veteran teacher, there's so much that's built into this that helps to build my knowledge of within that content area. It was reading for that one particular, and also the supports that were built into the HQIR that she was able to pull from. So the shift is from curating, collecting, and creating the lessons to thinking about, during planning time, how do I leverage the pieces within this resource to meet the needs of my students within my classroom. So it's a shift in how we're using our planning time, because all of the pieces that we need are right there in the HQIR. So I talked a little bit about our pilot districts, but I want to share just a little bit about the impact of HQIR on teachers and students from those districts that did participate in our CDP pilots. Some common benefits they shared with us in terms of impact on teachers include how it has freed up teacher time to leverage the key aspects of the HQIR and its built-in supports to meet students' individual needs. So, you know, in reading and writing, we heard the rigor was much higher, and it was right after COVID when students are coming in with some gaps in their learning. And so there were challenges for students, but we did hear that the curricular coherence across the program, the familiar routines, the familiar organizers, and processes supported students in meeting the level of rigor required in the resource. We also heard how teachers have raised their expectations for what their students are able to know and do, regardless of ability and background. In terms of the impact they're seeing on their students, they pointed to how the HQIR helps to build the necessary background knowledge students need to engage in grade level content, and introducing them to places, cultures, and experiences they might not otherwise have access or exposure to, especially those from lower socioeconomic status. And they also spoke to how it has increased student interest and confidence in learning as they engage with challenging materials. Parents have even shared with teachers and leaders how students are coming home talking about what they're learning and what they're reading about at school. So what is an HQIR and where can you find them? So on the screen, we have our 6 characteristics that we have in our Kentucky specific definition for HQIR. But a common question we get is where to go to identify and evaluate potential HQIRs. Part of KDE's general definition of HQIRs is that they are externally validated and or research-based and comprehensive in nature. So we point towards EdReports and their green-rated materials. In case you're not familiar with EdReports, they're a nonprofit organization often described as the Consumer Reports of instructional resources. They're a for-educator by educator organization that publishes free reviews of K-12 instructional resources using an educator-led approach that measures standards alignment, usability, and other quality criteria. They review for-profit and nonprofit resources as well as open education resources. As I mentioned earlier, HQIRs are not a one-size-fits-all. There are local conditions, priorities, and needs that shape the selection and implementation of the selected resource. And so the graphic shown earlier draws the through line from setting a vision for instruction, selecting your resources, and providing rich job-embedded professional learning to truly impact student outcomes.
Crystal, can I interrupt just for a minute? We had a question in the chat. And could you speak to what is considered the you mentioned supplemental online resources previously. What falls under that, under those supplemental online resources, especially the low depth of knowledge? There are so many online programs being used across our classrooms.
Well, I think ultimately, we would want to see in classrooms a comprehensive HQIR that creates that curricular coherence in the classroom. But there are instances where you might need a supplemental to meet a specific need, especially as you're thinking about Tier 2 and Tier 3 support. So for each of those online programs, I would definitely look at what their research base is before selecting those. I know that there's not much out there as far as the evaluation of those supplemental online programs, and I'd have to look more into their research to actually see some of the examples that they provide. But I think when we are considering including those in the Tier 1 classroom, we would have to consider, like, what is the gap in our instructional resource that we are intending to fill with that supplemental resource.
And so I'll ask a follow-up question, and if that doesn't answer the question in the chat, just please respond in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and clarify. But so would a supplemental online resource be like if I were teaching a lesson and I found an activity, a game or a worksheet or something like that, or even a news article, and I use that as to supplement my lesson? Is that the kind of supplemental online resources you're talking about?
I think I would have to go back into the research a little bit better to understand completely. But when we think about the Tier 1 classroom, if we're bringing in something, that comes at a cost. So if you're thinking about the structure of the classroom experience, you want to ensure that students are engaging in these rich experiences in the classroom where they're engaging with each other. So, I've worked in intervention for years and used those online programs to supplement and looked for those that are research-based. But you also have to consider, are we giving up Tier 1 instructional time for students to sit on the computer to engage in those programs? And some of those programs, you have to be careful as you read the research base that they might share with you, because it may be based upon like a minimum amount of time that students are engaging with the program. So if the program says, like, we get this effect because students are on the program for 3 to 4 days per week for a full 20 to 30 minutes, you have to consider that when you're selecting that resource. So you might not be getting those effects if you're just squeezing it in, not to that level of what is actually in the white paper. So I don't know if that completely answers the question. I think what I'm saying is I would look at the research for your supplemental, make sure that you're sort of following what is included to get that research phase, and use it with caution when you're thinking about Tier 1 instruction.
Thank you.
And again, if there are additional questions or things that I can clarify after my presentation, I'll have my contact information at the end. And I do encourage you to reach out with any questions that you have regarding any of this material. The Office of Teaching and Learning has your complete guide to achieving the goal of reaching student outcomes with your HQIR in the model curriculum framework. And this is just a screenshot of the KY Standards website and where you can find the model curriculum framework. The curriculum development process is section 1 of the model curriculum framework. And this guidance lays out a process districts can use to develop and implement a strong local curriculum supported by their high quality instructional resource. And it's located under the standards resources on the KY Standards website. So the first phase of the curriculum development process is logistical in nature and focuses on preparing for the process. Phase 2 provides guidance on articulating a local instructional vision that reflects the Kentucky Academic Standards, current research for teaching and learning in the content area of focus and a district's local context. Phase 3, step 1, provides guidance on using the instructional vision to derive the selection of an HQIR to anchor the local curriculum. And this step is where the content area consumer guides fit in, that I'll talk about in just a minute. The CDP itself focuses on general guidance, whereas the consumer guides provide content-specific characteristics of high-quality instructional resources. So we currently have consumer guides for reading and writing and mathematics, and we have one for science that's going to be released on March 1st of this year. And the introduction, I went too fast. The introduction provides some background, context, connections to the curriculum development process, and spotlights the importance of high quality instructional resources. The second section focuses on the specific characteristics of high quality instructional resources for the content area. So for example, for reading and writing, it starts with our general definition of HQIR and then focuses on what that should look like for reading and writing. And the markers specifically point to characteristics of reading and writing resources you'll want to use as you evaluate to ensure that you have alignment to the Kentucky Academic Standards for reading and writing. And then there's also an equity lens with the focus for reading and writing look-fors that help to evaluate resources to ensure they are culturally relevant, free from bias, and accessible for all students. And then the final section outlines a 4-step local selection process. Each step includes a brief description, key questions to consider, and key tools to support the work. These resources also include things that will help you, such as vendor questions. So questions you can use when you're talking with vendors about what all is going to be included in your contract, what they provide as far as professional learning, and other considerations as well. And these are located on our KY Standards website under the Model Curriculum Framework, under the curriculum development process. So there's the reading and writing, there's mathematics, and science will be added in March. So as I mentioned, I know there's going to be lots of questions as you move forward, as you consider what might be next steps in your district. So we have some points of contact on the screen. So for HQIRs and supporting resources, Misty Higgins and Fox DeMoisey are professional learning coordinators, and they support many of our districts around selecting HQIR as they have questions. And then also, if you have questions regarding the Read to Succeed Act, I know many districts are considering their adoption of a comprehensive reading program. Christy Biggerstaff is a good contact as well. So if there is any questions for me or Tara, is there anything I can help clarify further?
No, the only thing I will just bring up is that on this committee, we have people, I mean, the Every Student Succeeds Act requires us to have representation from particular roles. So we have parents, we have school board member, we have district administrators, teachers, their public school ombudsman. And it's not just Title I Part A, but it's also, as I mentioned before, Part C, which is the migrant program. So we have people who work with the migrant program across our state, and also Title I Part D. So we have school specialists in counseling or other support roles in the school as well. So but I feel like even regardless of what somebody's role is, everybody brings their unique perspective to a topic like this. And so whether you're at a Title I school or not, I think this kind of information, it's just education across the board. So it really affects if anybody who's involved in education. So I appreciate the information very much. There were a lot of things in your presentation that really resonated with me. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question or a comment they'd like to make?
As you were going through it and on your slide, we just talked about the definition of the HQIRs is a tech center principal. And I was actually a physics engineering teacher for 20 years before I got into this role. And part of it's having the resources, but in our district, we're really working on authentic learning and project-based stuff and benefits-based thing. And it's combining those resources, but the teachers having the training to really engage the students in that on an authentic level. And that helps address some of the bias issues and those types of things where kids see that what they're doing is relevant. So
I appreciate you bringing that in because 20 years ago, when we think about textbooks, they are sort of turn the page and we're going to do this part together and then you're going to do some things on your own. But when we look at high quality instructional resources, they are much different and they're designed to create those authentic experiences for students. And that's why we talk about really including a comprehensive process of looking at high quality instructional resources because they're not all the same. Some have more of a technology base, some have more of a project-based learning lean. And so through the curriculum development process, we encourage districts to include families and to include community members in setting like what are the characteristics we want to see in the HQIR that's selected for our school or district. So it really includes feedback from like the full community and from parents as well, and thinking about what are those local things we want to make sure are reflected in the experience students have in the classroom.
Well, we have a in the chat. Thank you for presenting to us. Last call, any final questions or thoughts? And I'd like to thank Crystal again for presenting for us and to the committee members for great participation and engagement with that topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will go ahead and move on to our next agenda topic, which is on Portrait of a Learner. And David Cook, who's the Director of the Division of Innovation, will be presenting on that topic.
Thank you, Tara. Completely focused. Here we go. Everybody see it okay?
Yes.
Great. I appreciate being asked to be here today, especially because I always like to follow Crystal or someone who's been talking about instruction in particular, because it's probably one of the biggest goals of ours and of the state board, I think, to remind folks that the Portrait of a Learner is not an add-on. The Portrait of a Learner is a way for us to think about all of the skills that Crystal mentioned that are needed as students use high quality instructional materials and as the core is being taught. Because it's not, I don't want people to try to think about Portrait of a Learner as, oh gosh, that's something additional we have to do. Because as we move forward in this presentation, I think you'll see how sort of at the center of the Portrait of a Learner are the core academic standards. So we'll just hopefully again, and if you have questions at the end, I'm sure that most. So the Portrait of a Learner conversation has been around for quite a while. And at the heart of that conversation is this question: what does it mean to prepare a graduate? This is a little bit of a different question than what does college readiness mean? What does career readiness mean? At the federal and state level, those two questions about readiness have always been based on usually some sort of assessment. But it still is limiting because it doesn't really get us to that question of what are the skills, content knowledge, and dispositions or mindsets that students need to be successful after they graduate. So we're excited, very excited, that in Kentucky, we have sort of focused in on this conversation about Portrait of a Learner. The State Board of Education, and we'll talk about this in a little bit detail in a minute, has adopted a set of model competencies, which we researched and found to be common across most Portraits of a Learner across the country. And we now have 100 districts as of last week who are either developing or have developed a Portrait of a Learner. So that was a big milestone for us. The two last week, we hit that 100 mark out of 171 districts, a whole lot faster than I think I or anybody at KDE thought we would. But it's kind of like inertia. It starts to move, and each time a district hears about another district close by, they tend to get more interested. So we're excited about that. You can see the numbers here on this slide. 67 districts already have it completed and are implementing it. Another 33 are developing competencies. 17 are considering development. We do have 5 districts that have chosen or said they're not going to do it. And we're still struggling because we're working really hard to identify, but we still have quite a few districts who we don't know about. So we're still trying to find out about those. So here's the journey to Kentucky's current Portrait of a Learner status. In 2017, the commissioner at the time, Commissioner Pruitt, charged me with beginning this process. What does it look like to identify competencies beyond the academic standards that support the academic standards? And we worked through our Kentucky Innovative Learning Network. Some of your districts may be in that network. It's about 45 of them right now. And we brought together those districts and began to think about what the competencies were that might be considered in a Portrait of a Learner. It wasn't called that at the time. It wasn't really a thing yet. But we worked across those districts, some of whom already had them, and came up with, at the time, what we called anchor competencies, which were five of the 6 competencies you saw on the title slide. And we started the process in those districts. There were 11 districts of trying to figure out how to measure those and implement those across the school district. And then this thing called COVID happened. And we had to stop all that work. And it's been hard to get people back into that process, but we're getting there with several districts now. And then when Commissioner Glass came on board, he, as you probably are aware, conducted listening tours across the state and asked questions about what did you want the future of education to look like in Kentucky, asked teachers, students, community members, business leaders, policymakers. And we got in that, through that listening tour, we got a report called the United We Learn report, which basically demonstrated to us what the people of Kentucky thought were important things. And at the heart of that were three key elements, three themes. You can see them in italics under the United We Learn report. More vibrant learning experiences for all kids, accelerating innovation, particularly as it relates to assessment and accountability, and then community collaboration. So those things have led all of the work to date. We then identified 18 school districts in the state that we call local labs of learning. And those local labs were charged sort of with taking portraits of a learner and moving them beyond just a piece of paper that was developed by the district and making them more real by implementing them, assessing them, and reporting on those measures. Then the State Board of Education came through and said, we see all this, we've done all the research nationally, we found 6 competencies that we think are they're comparable and comparable across all portraits of a learner that we've looked at. They may have small language differences, but that was something that was important to the State Board of Education. So they adopted these model competencies in sort of a state portrait of a learner. But since that time, and I think the reason that we've gotten so quickly to 100 districts with portrait development is the state board kind of recognized that it's important for each local district to have their own portrait. So more emphasis has been placed lately on the use of the competencies as a foundation for building a portrait, but not sort of adopt this state portrait. And then we now have a group, state stakeholders, about 60 people, who are reviewing what local districts are doing with their portrait and giving advice and feedback on what should happen next. And those are things like, how do we incorporate the portrait into, say, how does that become local accountability, and how does local accountability fit into a newly defined accountability system, which is what I think everybody is trying to look at, is what does accountability look like that gives some ownership of local measures to that process. Okay. This is an interesting little piece of information. Portrait of a Learner is even older than 2017 when I mentioned the first group that started working on it. If you go all the way back to CARA, if you look in the statutes of the state of Kentucky, and you see that there were capacities listed, were called capacities in 1990, and that all of that can be seen here, and you'll see a lot of the same stuff in these 8 skills, 8 capacities that we're talking about today. So on the left in this different specific screen is the 6 competencies that the state board adopted earlier in 2023. And these, as I said, you can look on the right side, you'll see LaRue County's learner profile, that they call it. That's another thing that's important to recognize, is nobody said you have to call it some particular thing. But you'll see in their competencies most of what you see in the state portrait. I think it's really important to understand that we have engaged citizen, which almost all portraits talk about that responsibility to make sure students are part of society and working on making society better. Critical thinking, which is something that's very deeply rooted in high quality instruction. Effective communicator. The empowered learner is the most important one to me. It's sort of central. It's at the bottom of this particular graph on purpose because it's sort of the foundation. which is where the content standards lie. So as a part of developing mastery of those content standards, it's part of this whole idea around a portrait of a learner. Then a creative contributor, which is the newest one, the 6th one that was added by the board this last fall, because we know that part of what's important for folks, especially in the 21st century, is that a student is able to be a part of new solutions. So that's an incredible part of it. And then finally, productive collaborator, that they're parts of teams, because everywhere you turn, and Mr. Vincent, I was thinking about you when I thought about this particular competency. People have to be part of teams. Decisions are made in business, in the world, and they're not just some person deciding it. When there's a new thing that needs to happen on an assembly line in a factory or any other element of the workforce, people come together and create that solution. And so collaboration has to be a part of everything that students do. We've developed a continuum, which is kind of where we see the steps along the path of the development and implementation of a portrait of a learner. You can see these right here. What does it look like to develop it, publish it, develop the assessments that will go along with it? How do we change instructional design to incorporate it? How do we involve the community in the push towards the implementation? And what policies are required at the local level? And then you have a fully functioning instruction and assessment system that incorporates these common competencies. At the department, and you can see a QR code here, we developed a guidance document around the portrait of a learner so that you can access, it's a lot of great resource about the steps along the process and what districts are asking us and telling us that they need. I think this document and this set of resources that's online has been another factor in us moving so quickly to 100 districts. So that's also available. This is just an example for you of the other part of this that's been very important. When we developed the competencies, we didn't just say, okay, here they are. Here's the definition and the pieces of that definition. But we wanted it to be important for people to understand and be able to see what mastery looked like, because the competencies are not like they're not different for different grade levels. It's the same competency. It's just a different level of mastery for a 2nd grader, a 5th grader, an 8th grader, and a 12th grader. So we're not trying to say, okay, you're going to teach collaboration to early elementary kids and then stop teaching it. You're going to continue it throughout the course of a high school experience with just different levels of depth. More information that's available on our website, additional resources. There's a frequently asked questions document for Portrait of a Learner. There again is video that's available on YouTube, from YouTube that explains in a little more detail what the portrait is and how the state board went about their process of adopting these competencies. And then, of course, we had a lot of questions about our kind of worries and wonderings. Where should the portrait live? That's probably been the biggest question to date about the Portrait of a Learner. Initially, the board had a big push to put it in graduation requirements, which was met with a lot of pushback. Part of that pushback came for different reasons. Probably the couple of largest reasons were, if you put it in the graduation requirements, you basically sort of defaulted it into being something that is done starting in 9th grade. And we didn't want that to be the case. We wanted this to be something that happens across all the years of schooling. And it limited, we think, the ways in which people could develop and implement a portrait of a learner. What are our next steps for guidance and support as we get to higher and higher numbers of districts that are looking to do a portrait? And then there's a lot of deeper learning efforts going on in all of your districts through the Deeper Learning Grant, through, in some of your cases, the PBL Works Grant, and all the professional learning that has been happening across the state as a result of that. How do we keep that going as we seek to help more districts develop a portrait of a learner? So those are the things that we've been thinking most about. So now I just want to ask what questions might you have? Whoops. As we think about this. Let's stop that. Start again. Questions that you might have. Comments? Anybody have any stories or things from your district about this process?
I will share one of the things that we did recently here is we had a tour set up for like our local members of like Chamber of Commerce. Mm-hmm. And we were trying to introduce them to here's and basically it's called a graduate profile in Bullitt County. And right. I kind of like the portrait of a learner because it makes you think of all grades instead of just high school. And we do apply it across all grades. But anyway, we wanted to introduce that to them and actually had them do like a PBL slice with us. Okay. And had them identify, okay, what competencies or what did you have to do to accomplish this? Then they toured the building and saw some of our PBLs, and our kids actually did some presentations of a project that they graded. And then we just asked them, what did you see from the kids? And it was really just written down in like notes that, you know, your kids knew the content, they spoke confidently. Just some really neat stuff like that. And it's kind of a cool way to kind of see how maybe you can develop a way for that community to kind of see the benefit and the accountability of it. And we kind of fell into it by accident, but it was really neat to just get that feedback from folks in the community about, you know, there were kids that were like, hey, we want to follow this person. We'd be able to hire this person. So that was kind of neat, and it was kind of by accident how it all kind of fell into place. But
yeah, thank you, Daryl. Appreciate that. Bullitt County, of course, is one of our local laboratories of learning, so we're excited about the work that's going on there. And we've, as I mentioned, you know, the steps after people sort of develop the competencies are. The questions they have to ask are, how are we going to implement these? What is it going to look like in our classrooms? Also, what are we going to do? What about this are we going to measure? And then how are we going to measure that? What we tend to find, and it's also tied very closely into PBL and it's tied very closely into deeper learning activities, is what people are doing to measure those. And we have about 3 or 4 districts who are actually at that step, where they've actually identified those measures and are thinking about how they're going to implement them or measure those and report them. Most of the time, what you see happening, people call it something different, but at the end of the day, it's a defense of learning. It's, you know, this is what it looks like at 5th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade, to show people in the community, and that's usually the way it happens, is they bring together a group of teachers and other community members to sit on teams to sort of observe these defenses of learning. And it's a place for a student to show what they have learned and how they've learned it and how they've applied it. At the end of the day, to me, that's the word I would use about the portrait. The portrait is a great way to think about the application of the knowledge that students have mastered. It's how do we in teams, how do we in groups, how do we across the spectrum of what we've learned, how do we show that it has some value and we are able to apply it because we've done a project or we've done some other form of deeper learning, like you just sort of given us an example of, Daryl. I think that's the value and that's where people are going. So we have these local laboratories of learning, which I mentioned are 18 districts across the state, and several of them have not only adopted a portrait, they have begun to implement it and actually see results that they can share with both the community and others, that here's what our kids are doing beyond simply the very important part of getting a test score or getting a grade in these content areas, but how do we take that the next step further? How do we get them prepared because they know all these skills and dispositions they need in addition to the content knowledge that they need to have? I guess that's it there.
All right. All right. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So thank you so much, David, for spending time with us here this morning to talk about this important work. And again, thank you to our committee members for your engagement in this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, we will move on to our next agenda topic, which is paraeducators under Title I Part A. Again, even though this is specific to Title I Part A, it really has implications for, for everybody on the committee, regardless of your role. And this was a topic we discussed at a committee member meeting a couple of times ago, and it's something we've been hearing about over the last few years. And so I wanted to start with I don't have slides for this, but I wanted to start with a quick review since we've had some new committee members to join since the last time we talked about this. And so I'm going to share with you, hopefully this will pull up pretty quickly, our webpage on paraeducators. Let's see how I'm going to be able to do this. Well, that's not what I want. I'm trying to get to the web page. Here we go. All right, can you all see that? Can everybody see the paraeducator webpage?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this is our webpage. You can see the click path to get here. You can put paraeducator in the search bar on the main KDE webpage to get here, or you can go to federal programs, title programs, Title I Part A, and then paraeducator requirements. So these are our support staff, and it is covered in Title I Part A, and we implement the requirements of this. So the webpage starts off with the section of the Every Student Succeeds Act that outlines the requirements for teachers and paraeducators working in a program supported with Title I-A funds. And so I'm going to scroll down here to just kind of give you an overview, and then I want to pull up a frequently asked questions document, again, just to show you the resources that we have, and then to provide a little bit of an update on where we're going with the work. So these are the requirements of a paraeducator working in a program supported with Title I Part A funds. So that would be a school-wide program, and it would also be a targeted assistance program if, and so for school-wide, it's any paraeducator working at the school, regardless of whether they're paid with Title I-A or not. And then for targeted assistance, it's for a paraeducator who's paid in full or in part with Title I Part A funds. And there's another instance in that that I'll cover in the frequently asked questions. It goes over that information. And so it would be a paraeducator who is providing equitable services in a private school as part of Title I Part A. They also would have to meet the requirement. But I'll show you that frequently asked question when we get to that document. So here are the requirements. They must have a secondary school diploma or recognized equivalent. And then they also have to, if they're working at a Title I school, they have to meet one of these additional requirements. So they have to at least complete 2 years of study at an institute of higher ed. They must have or attained associate's or higher degree or met a rigorous standard of quality and can demonstrate through a formal state or local assessment knowledge of these areas. And so in Kentucky, so we have a few definitions here, but that assessment that I mentioned, that third way that a person could meet the requirement is the assessment that we use is the Kentucky Paraeducator Assessment. And so here's some information about it. It consists of 60 multiple choice questions. It is the responsibility of the local school district to administer it. And the records are maintained again by the school district. So the reason, let me pull up the FAQs and then I'll get to more. And please stop me if you have any questions at any time. So we have on these FAQs some of the information we just saw. Goes over the requirements again. I wanted to talk about who's required to take it. This is what I touched on before. So if they don't hold an associate's degree or haven't completed 2 years at an institution of higher ed, they have to take the KPA if they're working at a Title I school. Let's see, this is not the one I wanted to show you. Okay, that's the last question. I just wanted to make sure I gave you the correct information. Here it is. Okay, this is question number 2. So that if they are working in a targeted assistance school and paid fully or in part with Title I funds, all paras working in a school-wide program, regardless of the funding source from which they're paid, and if they're employed by the district to provide instructional support to a public school teacher who provides equitable services to eligible private school students. Okay, that's the other one. So we have, we've heard requests and comments that the KPA, we've had it in place for a long time and it's about due to be revised, needs to be updated. And so we've discussed that at a previous meeting of this committee, and I'm going to stop sharing. Just give me 1 second. We discussed this at a previous committee meeting, and we heard from some districts who implement and who work with paraeducators. We heard some best practices, we heard some challenges, we heard some feedback about implementing these requirements. And also, we had discussed that we were thinking of ways that we could provide additional support in that area. And I think that we have had internal discussion. And one thing that we've determined is that we would like to focus on updating the KPA, as it is due for a revision. So we are in the very, very beginning stages of working on an RFP, a request for proposals, for a vendor to help us revising that. Obviously, we want that assessment to be field tested. It needs to be valid and reliable. And so those are some reasons why we are seeking some RFPs on that to see what could be provided, what's available. I would like to have any feedback from, regardless of your role. Everybody can have a experience with this sort of thing, whether it's in the field of development of assessment or whatever. But any feedback you might have on advice or comments as we start to move forward with the RFP. For example, something that we've kind of discussed, and since we don't directly work with this administration of it at the district level, it's currently a paper and pencil test. It's administered by districts. Records are kept by the districts. So one question we've been discussing is, would we want to move to an online test if we did get a vendor to help develop a revised KPA, and assuming that the content is, valid, reliable, and it's been field tested and so on? Do we want to keep it as a paper and pencil test or an online test? Would it be best for districts to continue to maintain those records, or how would the records be maintained? Those are a couple of questions. I'm sure there will be lots more coming up, but we would love to get some early feedback as we're starting in this process on any advice, questions to consider, anything like that you guys might have to offer. And again, we will continue to provide you with updates as we move through this process. So I'll open up to anybody who has a question or comment at this time.
So my head is spinning about current data on what's been used for a long time. Like, do we have any data on the pass fail rate of that? How successful has that been? Then my next question, which is, if a paraeducator works in one district and passes that and goes to another job, does that data follow them, or do they have to pass the test again once they go into another district? So if you did something statewide, once you passed, you would pass, but how are those records kept? Because in Northern Kentucky, we have lots of close districts. I can see paraeducators switching. And there could be an answer right out there. It's just that I'm not aware of those kinds of answers. So I think we could learn from the past before you move forward what needs to be done.
Thank you for those. Those are very good questions. I'll attempt to answer part of one, but I think that these will be really good questions as we move forward too. And David Melanti, he actually works in our same division, and he may be able to help with that second question, because I'm not sure. But on the first question you had about the pass and fail rate data, do we have that? We do not. That is data that the district maintains. So they keep those records. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I did want to mention we do check for that during monitoring. We check that the districts are holding those paras to the requirement. And then your second question, so we check that at the district level when we monitor, but we do not have that data overall. So that's a good point. Then your second question was, if a paraeducator passes the test in the KPA in one district, does that follow them and go to another district, or do they have to take it again? My understanding is that they wouldn't have to take it again. But David, what has been your experience during monitoring of what we've seen in that? Can you weigh in?
I would agree with that. I don't think we have any standard practices for district to district follow-up on reaching out to get those scores. But yeah, the test would be exactly the same. So there should be no reason for a person going from one district to another to have to retake that exam.
And I think that would be a really good question to add to our FAQs list too.
Yeah, I was just looking through that, and I don't think it's in there, but yeah.
Yeah. That's a great one. Okay. Any other questions, comments, advice, things to keep in mind as we start working on that RFP? Because we want to get the RFP right, because it's what we're interested in looking at is something that what we're interested in getting is something that's going to be a big focus.
Tara, I'll add a couple comments. Cost
Sure.
to districts would be one thing to consider. And then alignment with some of the stuff we heard today, around the skills, maybe around Portrait of a Learner, for example, because we do have a good majority of districts, involved in that work, but also alignment with, our standards are constantly changing. So making sure that it's aligned with those standards, especially in the reading and the math areas, writing areas, and then ensuring that as things change, if we continue with a vendor, for example, that those things are revisable, kind of like at any point.
Thank you.
Are there any plans to seek input from districts on how things have been working and what they would like to see changed or not changed? If it's working, don't fix it, So is there any information to try to see? Because, we've had districts been doing this for a very, very long time. And, some people might think, oh, we need to go to an online assessment, but maybe sticking with paper and pencil is the right way to go with this assessment. So is there any seeking information from those that do this on a regular basis?
We haven't yet. First of all, this committee is one of those bodies that we would definitely consult. We haven't gone so far yet as to put together like an advisory type committee that could really, be involved in that. And I mentioned field testing before. I can totally see a committee like that being involved, or those districts being involved in field testing if and when it came to that point. We have not got that far yet, but we definitely do want to get feedback from the districts on their experiences. But again, this committee is one of the first ones that we would want to consult. So thank you for that good question too. I'm making notes of these so that we can have this information as we move forward with this. Any other thoughts on this topic? All right, then I anticipate I'm looking towards our next agenda item, which is to talk about future agenda topics and current upcoming meetings. We do have a meeting on April the 25th, I believe. Let me scroll down in my notes here. No, I'm sorry. I think it's April the 23rd, which is a Tuesday. And I've got a few ideas here for agenda items, but I would love to hear if you all have any other questions or things that we could look at adding as well. So I'll talk to you briefly about the agenda items I've tentatively got here, and we should have plenty of time if you all have any other requests. So the paraeducator will be another, again, moving forward, we'll keep you informed about work on that topic that we just talked about. We also are going to be modifying, just adding to our monitoring process for districts. We're going to be adding some procurement items, indicators to the monitoring process. And we are also finalizing a new procurement resource to support districts. So the next agenda item, we would add to our next Title I Committee of Practitioners agenda an item about the monitoring process. We'll go over that, what it currently is, and then information about the new indicators that we would be adding to that. We are also planning in the very early stages of planning a training tentatively in June, and it will focus on anticipated changes to the uniform grants guidance. Those changes would go into effect on July 1, so we are hoping to have a training in June that will go over those. So we'll talk to you about any plans for the training, assuming that that all moves forward smoothly. And we also have contracted with a vendor for a Title I documentation storage tool. So as the districts implement the programs, they have to keep documentation that they're meeting various requirements. And we have a new vendor that we're working with that will provide a documentation storage tool. We are in the process of rolling that out. And so I think by April, we should have a nice update for you all that we can talk a little bit about the tool and what we're seeing so far as districts using it and their feedback on that. David, did you want to say anything else about the storage tool or any of these other items that I mentioned?
I was gonna ask you to maybe put Aaron on that one, and then so the tool's a voluntary tool that we're just experimenting with to hopefully reduce burden around the collection of documentation and to provide districts with a more efficient and effective way to collect that documentation with some reminders, some checkpoints in there, nothing required for any district. It's a totally voluntary opt-in process.
Yeah, and it's a program that could be used to store documentation for any federal program. It's not Title I specific, but that is
Yeah.
the program that is spearheading it right now. And
Yeah.
we will definitely have presenters to come in and talk about these topics. Do you all have any requests, any specific asks for the next meeting? Even if it's a review of something that you're not clear on, any requests at all, we're happy to do that, or updates that you would like from a particular program area. Okay. If you think of anything, please just send me an email directly. Don't need to reply to the group. Just send me an email directly, and we will try to get that on the agenda for you if you think of anything. Does anybody else have anything, any parting comments, questions before we adjourn?
Tara, I saw on the list of committee members at the bottom, you had a note that there are vacancies for teachers or other positions maybe. Is it possible that we could request some nominations from this group for those positions?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. If you all have any ideas for a teacher, especially, we need more representation from teachers. But any role group really is very helpful, as David mentioned. So if you know of anybody that would be interested or that you would like to see on the committee, please please just send me an email and we'll reach out to them. Because thank you, David, for bringing that up. That's a great point. All right, anything else? All right, thank you all so much for spending time with us this morning and for providing your very helpful and needed feedback on our work here. I really appreciate your time with us and your expertise. Thank you for being here and for being part of the committee. Have a great day.